All right, everybody. I am on the line right now with Eric Bischoff. How are you today?
I am doing well, doing very well.
Usually, I start by asking what you've been up to, but we saw you not more than a few hours ago last night on TV. So, what do you think of your return to TNT?
Well, it was a ton of fun, and I didn't really think about how long it's been since I've been on TNT until I actually got on location and we were talking about what we were going to do that day. And it dawned on me then. I don't know if somebody else said it to me or if it just occurred to me. I don't remember. It was kind of a passing thought for a moment. And I went, wow, it's 20 years. That's a long time. A lot of things have changed in 20 years. So it was really cool. What made it really interesting is so many of the people that were a part of my life, a big part of my life in WCW. Keith Mitchell, for example, who's, I don't know what his official title is, but he's really the head of production at AEW. He pretty much runs the entire production crew. He was there. And of course, Tony Schiavone and Jim Ross and Arn Anderson. And there were so many people that I had worked with in the past, and not in names you wouldn't know, names you wouldn't recognize. I won't expose them here, but there's probably no fewer than a dozen people that, were with me in the trenches in WCW and Nitro in the very beginning. And to be able to work with them again 20 years later, it's freaking awesome.
And I think everybody that at least I saw really hit the nail on the head. It's Eric Bischoff on TNT on a wrestling program, and it just something feels right about it. So
yeah, it's kind of like that. It's kind of like that macaroni and cheese meatloaf moment. You go when you're sitting down in a restaurant. There's all kinds of really, really, interesting looking exotic things on the menu, and then you look over to the side, and there's a selection for just comfort food. It's just meatloaf, and it's just macaroni and cheese or mashed potatoes. But damn, you're familiar with it, so you enjoy it. But you might not want to eat it every day.
How'd the opportunity come up, and what? I'm sure a few people want to know what took so long, because as soon as you left WWE, there was already talk like Eric makes a lot of sense. Put him on TNT, and he'd be good for this presentation. So how did it really come up where this debate as this role as a moderator really made sense?
Well, I think, the timing of it all pretty much played out in public. AEW had a big event that they were promoting, a fundraiser that they were promoting in Jacksonville. And I think they wanted to get as much awareness and publicity for it as they could. And AEW, I think it was Tony himself, Tony Khan, or perhaps it was Cody. I'm not sure. I wasn't on the call. Had been talking to Conrad, and somebody asked if I'd be interested in doing something, just online, on 83 Weeks or on adfreeshows.com to help them promote their events. And of course I said yes. There's no way I wouldn't have done that. And we did that. I think everybody got along and the feeling was good. As they say, the crack was good. You have to Google that. But it just felt good. Everything was fine, and a couple of days later, I got a text from someone, I'm not going to divulge that, asking me if I'd be interested in doing a scene. So, of course, I said yes. I had nothing going on. All my family that came in for the 4th of July and all our friends have kind of gone home, and I was just getting back to my daily grind, so I thought it might be fun to go and do something different.
So what was the experience like just being back on TV? We already touched on being in a familiar environment with TNT, some of the personnel, but your last run with WWE was a backstage role, and this was something that not only people wanted to see for a while, but you also have experience, being an on-air figurehead.
It was really fun because that's, when I was in WWE, I wasn't an on-camera performer. I hadn't really done anything in front of a camera in over probably 5 years, 6 years. And a lot of the work that I had been doing before that in TNA, some of it I really enjoyed. Some of it was just necessary evil. The character really wasn't that interesting of a character. It was the same old character that people had seen in WCW and WWE to a large degree. So the extension of that same old character into TNA worked well in a couple situations and for a period of time. But, you know, you just can't play the same character over and over and over again and expect the audience to stay interested in it unless you round out that character and it changes and evolves. And I didn't. So I think, you know, I was kind of getting a little tired of television while I was doing TNA because it just wasn't challenging or fun or new. And then to go, you know, to stop doing television for 5 or 6 years, you know, a couple things happened. One, I realized how much I missed it because I enjoy doing it. It's just like, you know, there are certain physical things that if I don't do them often enough, I start missing them. You know, I love running, and if I don't run often enough, I start to really miss running, the way it makes me feel. And it's kind of true with doing television. There's a vibe I get, and, you know, I'm playing somebody other than myself to a large degree or to a small degree, depending on the scene. But it was just fun, and it felt natural, and I was excited to do it. And, you know, I miss it. I started realizing how much I miss it when Conrad and I would start doing live shows. And in a live show, you know, we did the live 83 Weeks podcast. And in those live shows that we did, you know, you'd get 1,500, 2,000 people, you know, on a good show, 3,000 people, whatever the number was. Sometimes less, but you're in a smaller kind of comedy club or things like that. And to be able to go up there and perform in front of an audience and make people laugh and make people angry and make people, you know, react the way you wanted them to react and basically just entertain them, that's when I realized, man, I guess I missed this TV stuff more than I thought I did. So getting a chance to do it again, you know, last night on TNT and AEW in particular, it was a blast. It just felt good.
Now, is this something that you could see yourself doing again, maybe later this year? Did you guys talk about any future plans?
No. And look, it was a cameo, you know, and it made sense in that particular scene, you know, between Chris Jericho and Orange Cassidy. It was a nice little surprise for some people. Unfortunately, it leaked and it had gotten out on the internet to a certain degree. So I don't think it was as big of a surprise as it could have been, and certainly didn't have the impact it would have had, not to put myself over, but if that same scenario would have played out in A, we would have been able to keep it secret, and I'm sure we could have, and B, it would have been in front of a live crowd. I think the reaction to that entire scene, both Jericho's reactions, Cassidy's reactions, and the reaction to me, at least initially, would have been pretty fun. But hey, you know, you do the best you can with what you got to work with, and AEW did. And I think based on the feedback I'm getting, there's always a handful of people that are haters, but that's just what they do. For the most part, it's been really, really positive, which of course I'm happy for me, but I'm really happy for the folks at AEW because they took a little bit of a risk putting me out there. There was some potential blowback there, but it seems to have worked out okay.
Yeah, I think it was, in spite of all having it leak early, I think it was well received. I really enjoyed it. And I made the comment last night that, you know, you played the straight man to Jericho and Cassidy and really set the table for them almost. But at its heart, it was a political angle. And I think you might agree you are well versed in that area. At least you have more knowledge than I do. But you know, it wasn't something that was very on the nose. It wasn't, you know, in your face, like, here, this is Democrat, Republican, and the MJF thing has been compared to, you know, Donald Trump with last week he wore like the same suit, and like they were more subtle notes. But, you know, like how successful do you think these type of angles can be? Because they're not hitting you over the head with this is political. It's just, you know, it's almost election time. It's a debate. It was fun. And
you just answered your own question right there. It was fun. You know, and I watched the stuff that MJF did, and I thought it was, first of all, I think he's an amazing, I don't want to go on and on because it'll sound ridiculous, but I'm so impressed with his talent and his abilities. You know, I saw it last night, you know, and you can say that scene was a great scene or not a great. You can have an opinion, right? But again, I've said this before, you know, it's one of the reasons why it's hard for me to watch wrestling because I'm always looking at it as a producer, as someone who has spent now 33 years either directly in the business for the vast majority of that or peripherally as I am now on the outside looking in, for the vast majority of my life, I've learned, trained, become critical in my thinking in such a way as a producer that I don't watch it for entertainment value. Or if there's entertainment value there, it's got to be really obvious for me, because I'm constantly picking apart music, lighting, camera positions, story. I really try to analyze story, not to be critical of it, but I like to pick out something that's working and really understand why it's working, as opposed to saying, wow, that's really great, I love that. Well, cool. Why do I love that? And again, that's a producer of me. What elements are in that story or a part of that character that's resonating with the audience? So that's kind of like the whole, that's the movie that's going on inside of my head while I'm watching wrestling. And every once in a while, something happens that stops the movie in my head because it's so entertaining to watch on television. And MJF is that guy. He is that character. And there are others. I'm not, but I'm just really talking about him because I think he's a special character and they don't come around very often. I think Orange Cassidy has a capacity to be that. His character's it's so simple. I mean, he personifies, Orange Cassidy personifies the saying, less is more. And has applied that to his character in a very simple but so effective way that the character's getting over. At least that's my interpretation, because it's different than Orange Cassidy's character is completely different than everybody else. Goes out there and they tell you they're going to kick your butt, they're going to do this, and they're going to do that, and they scream and they yell and they're angry. And this dude comes out with his hands in his pockets, shuffles his feet, and acts like he doesn't really give a damn. That's a cool character. That's a perfect, in my mind, it's a saying I've used a million times, less is more. And I'm excited about him as well. Anyway, we didn't come here to talk about those two guys. Unless you want to, and I'm happy.
No, I will, because I feel like every so often people bring up the fact that everything's been done in wrestling before, and you have two key examples of guys that are doing something unique and different and putting their own touch on it where it does feel new. Like,
and brother, I have a friend, and I've done shows with him. His name is Tom DeShane. He graduated from Harvard. He wrote a book about Shakespeare. He's a filmmaker. He's a game developer. He's a wrestling fanatic. He's just one of the most talented guys I've ever had the pleasure of being in business with. And we are actually in business on a project. And Tom and I would, because he's a scholar. I mean, he wrote books on Shakespeare that have won awards from Harvard. I mean, this guy's really, really smart, and he knows Greek mythology, and he just knows it all. And because he's a wrestling fan over at adfreeshows.com, occasionally, not as often as we'd like, but we'll sit down and we'll take a storyline, or we'll play out a scene, or we'll break down a scene or a storyline more often than anything, or sometimes even a match. And we'll break it down in terms of the elements of that story and what made that story work and what didn't make it work. And oftentimes Tom, because of his education and his background, and just because he's crazy smart, will actually compare some of the elements in stories to Greek mythology. The end of all of this conversation, which probably you're probably half brain numb by now, but is that nothing's new. There are basically 7 different plots. There are 7 different stories that have been told by every author, by every playwright, since the beginning of time, when men were telling stories with sticks from a fire in the char and drawing pictures of the hunt on cave walls. There's basically 7 stories. Nothing is ever new, but it's what you do and how you represent those characters or those stories that makes it feel new. And that's the challenge. And I think when people start thinking about story and really breaking down what works and what doesn't work, and some of it, works for other people, doesn't work for you as a performer. So you've got to find the story and the character that you can go, wow, I'm not a trained actor. I don't work on Broadway. I don't make movies, but I can get behind this character and just refine it. And I don't know what the process, Orange Cassidy had for coming up with that character. I can't wait to talk to him again and find out, because I'm really interested, genuinely interested. because I think he's a perfect example of, wow, something's working. Now let's really figure out why. Let's not put it over, because ideally you want to kind of replicate it. Not that you want to copy it, but if you understand the elements and what makes it unique and how it was applied, you go, okay, well, maybe if we do that and somewhere down the road and we change it up a little bit and we make it feel unique by doing this, you can tap back into that shit, man. You can steal your own stuff. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed that, because I thought about halfway through, I was like, okay, I think we're going with the Greek stories, like the 7 like storylines. I've heard that before, and it really is true. It's just wrestling gets put under the microscope even more, not only because that's what we're passionate about, but when people say, oh, they stole a move or they did this story, or you know what I mean, like the stable wars, and it's all like, yeah, it's all been done before, but it's about how you make it new again. So
exactly. The NWO wasn't the first faction to come along and be powerful in WCW. The Four Horsemen were there long before them. What are the elements you can take out of that? Now, I'm not saying that that's what I did. So I didn't think about the Four Horsemen when I was thinking about the NWO, but it doesn't change the fact that here's a faction, there's a faction. These guys were kind of outside renegades. These guys are kind of outside renegades. But it's sure nobody made the comparison really when they saw them, because the story played out differently. The backstory, the inciting incident that started the story was all completely different. Therefore, it felt different. But on its surface, it really wasn't.
Yeah, and I wanted to go back into WCW history a little bit, because it's August, and one of my favorite pay-per-view themes, which I'm probably in the minority about, but Hog Wild, Road Wild was an August event, and I really felt like the concept could have worked today. And I'll tell anybody that anytime it ever comes up, I think it could absolutely work for Bike Week in Daytona Beach. And I think especially now with social distancing, it would be a good idea. And I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on how you originally approached the idea and why you think it didn't work out. If it was logistics, if it was a variety of reasons, because looking back at the match cards themselves, they were really, really great match cards. You had the Giant and Hogan one year in the main event. You had Luger and Hogan, where Luger won the title, and I remember that being a huge deal. And then the next year, you were in the tag team match against Jay Leno and DDP. So
the reason why I did it, and I've covered this before on the 83 Weeks podcast with Conrad, I tend to reverse engineer almost everything in my life. Meaning I work backwards from where I want to be. I work backwards from whatever the goal is I'm trying to attain. And in the case of Sturgis, there were a couple different goals that I was trying to attain when the decision was made to try it. We were, if people remember, because context is king, and you have to remember, you have to understand and appreciate the context of the decision as well as the decision itself. Within the context of the decision, we were increasing pay-per-views. We'd started increasing pay-per-views, I think, in 93, maybe 94. I don't remember when, but somewhere in the early 90s, soon after I took control of WCW, we started increasing revenues almost immediately once I got control, because that was the only source of revenue WCW really had. They weren't making money on house shows. Pay-per-views were technically making money as an event. The company as a whole was not making money, but the pay-per-views themselves were profitable as a line item. There was very little money in licensing and merchandising. As I said, ticket sales were next to nothing. So the only opportunity we had to increase revenues was to increase pay-per-views. It became very apparent to me early on that one of the reasons that pay-per-views work so well, there's a couple reasons, theoretically and ideally, that a pay-per-view works is because it's a combination of 4 or 5 or 6 or sometimes more weeks, so in the case of Sting and Hogan, over a year, of storyline buildup that leads to the final chapter of that book or the final scene in that movie that we've been watching for free on TV. Now we're going to see it play out on pay-per-view. It's one reason why it worked so well, and theoretically still does. The other reason they work so well is because they each, when they work well, is they each have their own personality. You know, WWE did a great job because they were the pioneers really in wrestling pay-per-view. So you have to give credit where credit is due. But each one of the pay-per-views had its own theme, its own personality back when they were only doing 4 a year or whatever it was. And then when we started increasing pay-per-views, so did WWF at the time, WWE now. And then it became apparent to me that, wow, we're losing the identity of these pay-per-views. Right now, at the point that I made the decision to go to Sturgis, I realized that almost all of these pay-per-views we were adding, we were giving them different names, but they felt the same. There was no personality. Starrcade had a personality and a little bit of a history and a legacy. Bash at the Beach, yeah, kind of, sort of, but it never really, in 93, it hadn't taken off to become a tentpole event, as they like to say in the entertainment business. So I knew if we were going to add Sturgis or add an August pay-per-view, it had to be something so different than the other 11 pay-per-views that it kind of stood on its own in terms of a brand. So that was the biggest reason. Almost as big as that was the fact that, having been familiar with Sturgis, I saw how much money Dodge trucks, Chevy, Ford, Jim Beam, Coors, Budweiser, you name it, every major advertiser in America that targets men 18 to 49 was spending a lot of money to be associated with Sturgis from a branding perspective. And I'm like, wait a minute, well, that makes sense. If they're doing it and I'm doing it, the likelihood of me being able to, develop a sponsorship or an advertising relationship with some of these clients is pretty high if I'm the only one there doing it in a very popular form of entertainment that targets the same demographic as the advertisers who were spending a lot of money to be in Sturgis were trying to attract. Mm-hmm. It was kind of a no-brainer from a business perspective. Now, as far as why it didn't work, probably two reasons primarily. And it's not what people think. People, on the internet who think they're smart and think they understand things that they don't really understand, and they just repeat shit that they've read somewhere from somebody else that doesn't know what they're talking about. The big criticism of Sturgis is, yeah, but they didn't even have any ticket sales. All right, I'll give you that. We didn't do the $100,000 or $150,000 perhaps that we could have done if we would have put that show in an arena somewhere, anywhere in the country on a hot summer day in August. Maybe we'd have done 150 grand at that time. Maybe probably closer to 100, 120 would be realistic for a gate there. We gave up that, but we enhanced. And by the way, my logic paid off very quickly. We started getting automotive advertisers very, very quickly, which put a lot more revenue in the bottom line than $150,000 worth of ticket sales, right? Mm-hmm. So it wasn't the ticket sales or lack thereof that made it not successful. The primary reason, I think it was just too expensive to produce there. Sturgis is in the middle of freaking nowhere. I mean nowhere. It's a small airport. Flights are very limited. In the summertime, it's one of the most popular destinations in America, not just over Sturgis, but the whole western side of South Dakota, Rapid City, the Black Hills, Mount Rushmore, the area where I live. A lot of people fly into South Dakota in the summertime for a vacation. A lot of people have summer homes there and recreational properties. And there's not a lot of flights in and out of there. So getting people in and out is a problem. Because Sturgis is so popular, for example, it's going on this weekend, and you'll find estimates on the low side of 250,000. You'll find estimates on the high side of probably 650,000 people. Nobody really knows because it's too hard to count. Because Sturgis isn't just in one location. It's spread out over a whole, they call it Sturgis, but it's a bike rally. It's a Black Hills bike rally, and there's people all over the place, 60, 80, 100 miles out that all converge on Sturgis still. So rooms are really hard to find. It's very uncomfortable there because rooms are so hard to find. Shooting outside is another, and when I say shooting outside, it's not like, the Daily Arena that I shot in with AEW last week. That's a really nice facility. Daly's is a great, it's an amphitheater. It's got a roof, and yeah, weather can become an issue. but not like when you're out in the middle of a parking lot with nothing over you. You're other than lighting, rigs and shit that'll fall on you if the wind comes through. And it did a couple times. We damn near had tornadoes a few times that almost blew our entire set apart. So that kind of risk reward analysis, after you do it 2 or 3 times, you kind of go, I don't know if I want to do that anymore. It works in a lot of respects, but the expense of doing it and the logistical challenges are overwhelming.
Look back in hindsight, I enjoyed it. I think now you're starting to see that with a lot of things WCW did that you really didn't get credit maybe 10 years ago for. And I know there was existing events, and one of them is Starrcade that people wanted to see back. WWE does it as a live event, but people really want to see it, what it was for WCW, what it was for Jim Crockett, and Halloween Havoc's another one of those. So while that maybe wasn't one person's idea, can you talk about just maybe your opinion why WWE doesn't use Halloween Havoc as a pay-per-view, and just your thoughts on WCW IP being used by current promotions?
Well, I mean, I don't really have a thought. I'm not sure who's using WCW IP because technically, legally, all of WCW's IP belongs to WWE. So I'm not sure about that. And I don't know enough to speak to it. So I'm just going to let that one slide. And I'll plead ignorance because it's true. In terms of, there are certain, I don't understand why WWE is not using Halloween Havoc, if they indeed own that intellectual property. Because Halloween, as I've learned, I talked about this on the podcast, I was under the misinformation that Halloween was only something that was celebrated in the United States. And that is not true. Halloween started in the UK and then migrated here to the United States. So Halloween it's a little bit like New Year's Eve. It's not really a national, well, New Year's Eve is a holiday. It's a day off for everybody. But Halloween is it's like St. Patrick's Day, right? Mm. It's one of those, it's not really a holiday, but it might as well be because everybody shuts down and parties for it. Whether you're a little kid and you're going to Halloween parties or you're going through your neighborhood knocking on doors, hopefully kids will be able to do that again someday. Weird that I even have to say that. Sad too. But, adults, that is the party of the year. Go to Las Vegas sometime on Halloween and just people watch. It's the best time ever. So I think taking advantage of something that most people recognize as a cause for celebration of one sort or another is worth, building a pay-per-view around. And it can be fun inherently because of the nature of Halloween Havoc with the costumes and the dresses and surprise and scary shit happening or trying to be scary shit happening. All of that stuff makes for, all kinds of fun things to do. So I'm a little surprised. I'm not disappointed. I didn't come up with the idea for Halloween Havoc, so I don't have a dog in the hunt, but it's a great theme and it's a great title, and I'm surprised somebody hasn't done it.
Looking back, do you have a favorite WCW pay-per-view theme that you either had?
It was definitely Halloween Havoc for me. Definitely, it was Halloween Havoc for me, and I don't know why. Maybe because as a kid, I always loved Halloween. It was in the fall, and leaves were turning, and it was still kind of nice outside, but it was getting colder, and football was starting, and then you got to go get a bag of candy. So, what kid is not going to dig that? Maybe that's where it all started for me. I don't know.
Yeah, I just always think the conversation's interesting because NXT did War Games, and I mentioned Starrcade, and there's always the pros and cons of, should they do it? Shouldn't they? Do they want to create their own identity? Do they want to, there's all kinds of questions. It's just.
Well, and their opinions is what they are.
Yeah.
Everybody has one, you know how that saying goes. Everybody has one. And unless you're in the business, unless you're sitting in the office and you're talking to your accountants and your finance people and you're looking at your 5-year plan and you're looking at whatever opportunities may or may not be where you want them to be at any given moment, you really don't have all the data to suggest that your way of thinking might be the right way of thinking for somebody because you don't have the information that they have. People tend to do it. That's why ESPN, sports talk shows work so well, because everybody who doesn't know what's really going on inside the locker room or with the team has a very strong opinion about how the team should run and what plays should be called and what players should be played and what players should be benched. It's like everybody's got an opinion about something they really don't have any real inside information on, other than what they've heard somewhere else from somebody they think knows what they're talking about. But that's the nature of it. That's why sports is successful. That's why, wrestling is frustrating as it is for someone like me to, for example, last week when it leaked, that I was going to take this role for AEW, I was really disappointed. Not for myself, it's not going to change my life really, but I was really disappointed for the people at AEW and for the network at TNT, because surprises have value. Surprises are commodities, and you can extract value from those commodities just like you can extract value from something you extract from the ground and turn into a mineral or fuel or food, for that matter. It has value. And when people just kill it and ruin it for the sake of feeling like they've got inside information and they have to share it with everybody to prove how smart or connected they are, I think is doing a real disservice to the fans, to the company that's working hard to produce things, to the talent that are on that show, working their asses off to produce the best show they can produce. And you have some jagoff, Reddit user or dirt sheet writer or somebody else that feels the need because they came across inside information to give it away so it can be a spoiler alert, so they can get some clicks on their website. I find that very disappointing, and that's one of the reasons why I speak out so aggressively against that type of thing.
Preface this saying it might sound hypocritical of me because of where I write, but I do like the surprise. Like, the nature of what I do is I'm going to come across spoilers, but I spoke with David Penzer last week, and he put it in a way that I understood very well. He said, spoilers are cool, but if you know everything and nothing's a surprise anymore, then what's the point of watching? And I relate to that, because when we kind of all started with quarantine, I almost saw this as a refresher, because I want to see wrestling with an audience like more than anybody, but not having as many spoilers get out is almost refreshing, because you're watching all of these shows with new eyes. So
no, and that's this is very philosophical, right? And let me also say that I understand you guys are a business. You work for a company that has an investment. They need to do what they need to do, and they don't really think too much about how it affects AEW. And I'm not saying your company, any company that's in the business that you guys are in your business, you're in your world, you have a job to do. If you work for that company, to generate as many views, clicks, advertisers, just like I did for WCW. You had to do the same thing. And the people associated with any company that's in the business of covering wrestling news. But I think there are many who are legitimate. I know of certain people that I don't know for certain, but I would bet almost anything, knew but didn't write about it. I respect those people more than ever. And I'm not saying every dirt sheet writer, or certainly not your site. I wouldn't be doing this interview with your site if I thought it was something that was really hurtful to the business. Certain things I've read, I go, oh God, I wish that wouldn't have come out. But look, it's going to be out there. I get that. But in the case of my appearance in AEW last week, I don't think any site claimed it was going to happen. If they did, I missed it. I know a Reddit user did, and there were some people that reported on that because it was out there. But it happens. But a lot of guys, guys that I never used to really appreciate or respect 20 years ago have really changed the way they're producing and covering their news for wrestling, including your site. So I don't mean to cast a heavy shadow across the entire industry, just certain people in it, Dave Meltzer.
I get it. I mean, I look at it from both sides. I'm not saying, I just look at it that way. Like I am almost forcing myself to read some of these things, and it ruins it for myself. But at the same time, I not saying I want empty arena shows to continue, because wrestling
No,
needs.
we do not want that. We do
But
not want
this
that.
is the one positive I can almost take from it, is that I don't know as much as I normally do. So if I can be positive about everything that's going on right now, I'm going to take that and enjoy it for whatever it's worth, you know?
Yeah, and I think, here's how I look at things, Bill, during this COVID era. Number one, I don't judge anybody's work product at this point, because I'm amazed at anybody. I was amazed at AEW when I went out there. And two things that I walked away from, when I got on the plane the next morning and was heading back to Wyoming, I thought two things. One is, it was so refreshing to be in a backstage environment. And I'm not a sociable person. And that's probably worked against me for the majority of my life. I'm more of an introvert than I'm not. And I tend to, when I show up to work, I leave people alone. I respect the process that they have to go through in order to get ready to do what they have to do. And I don't feel like me coming in and shaking hands and introducing myself to everybody while they're in the middle of their conversations or in the middle of their work is appropriate. So I kind of tend to stay by my side and I just watch, right? It's always been that way for me. And until I get to know somebody really well, then it's different, but it takes me a while. But I was walking around just observing, and the energy was so positive. It reminded me so much of when 95, 96, 97 WCW, not that there weren't issues or challenges or problems, there were, but overall, the feeling, the energy, the vibe, whatever you want to call it, was so high for a period of time that it was really fun showing up to do TV. It was hard work. It's always going to be hard work. But it was hard work that was so much fun. And when I walked around backstage at AEW, just hanging out, going through in my head the best way I could perform my stuff and things like that. Just watching, I was seeing that same meatloaf and mashed potatoes, that same comfort food when it comes to the energy that I was seeing with guys just working out their matches and girls working out their matches and sharing notes, and just the energy was so high that I really enjoyed that. That was my biggest takeaway, really.
We got your return to TNT last night. We can find you weekly on your 83 Weeks podcast. Do you have any shows, any themes that you're looking forward to coming up?
What we're going to be digging into Sturgis. Conrad pretty much, he tells me about a week in advance, sometimes 2 or 3 days in advance. Here's what we're going to cover. And he'll send me notes. And don't tell Conrad this, but I never read the notes. I don't like to prepare. Not that I prepare, like if I know we're going to talk about Sturgis 1996, for example, I'll go back and watch it. I'll go back and check news sites. I'll go back and check what was the number one song in the country music category in that particular week, that month. I'll try to get my head in that space. I'll often look, and I won't talk about all these things, but this is how I prep for my show, is I have to put myself in that time period in order to really do it justice. So when Conrad sends me notes and says, okay, we're going to talk about this, and there's 3 or 4 pages of notes, occasionally I'll look at it. If it's a topic that I really need to do some research on, I'll look at it. But for the most part, I just do my own research, and I'm mentally and kind of emotionally, I guess, prepared to talk about that pay-per-view because I've spent a couple of days kind of putting myself in that time frame. So I wait until Conrad tells me what we're going to talk about. I don't look too far in advance. I try not to think about things too far in advance because I don't like to have prepared answers. You've already figured out I fucking talk a lot. I just do. I answer questions you didn't even ask. I think Roddy Piper said something like that at one time. I've got so many answers. I got answers to questions you don't even know yet. That's what I do. But part of that is just energy and passion and excitement. And if I prep and I think about what I'm going to say, it changes the way I feel about it. And it comes across, I think, less interesting. So that's why I don't look at notes. And which is also why, to really answer your question, I don't have a freaking idea what we're talking about next week.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. You're going to revisit Sturgis at some point, and everybody can catch you on 83 Weeks. It's on Westwood One, Stitcher, all your favorite podcast apps. And Mr. Eric Bischoff, thank you very much for your time today.
Absolutely. And don't forget, you can check us out over at adfreeshows.com. There is a plethora of content over there that you can only get at adfreeshows.com. Last night, for example, I got on with 37 of our members on a Zoom call, and they each had an opportunity. Now I'm going to have to do it again because we ran out of time. But the people that subscribe to it and jump on get a chance to pick one match that they want to rebook. And what they would do differently, since everybody thinks they're a booker, I give them a chance. And we all compare notes and have fun doing it, really break it down. And I've heard some great things. So we did that. And Tony Schiavone's got exclusive content, Jim Ross, Arnie Anderson, everybody. So Bruce Pritchard. So check that out too.